Would you ever eat the placenta after giving birth? We're going to assess the evidence after a celebrity couple kicked up a storm. And we've also got the latest in our series on how artificial intelligence is changing healthcare. And this time we're heading to the GP surgery. But first, would you give your child melatonin to help them sleep? So melatonin's a hormone that's produced by the body and it makes us sleepy in the evening. And in some countries, it's considered a dietary supplement rather than a drug. And you can buy them as like chewy sweets or gummies. And that includes in the US, where this phenomenon of giving children a bedtime melatonin started. But the same trend seems to be taking off here too. So let's find out what's going on, whether we should be giving them to children as a sleep aid, and what any risks might be. So to discuss, I'm joined by Paul Greengrass, Professor of Children's Sleep Medicine and Neurodisability at Guy's and St Thomas's NHS Foundation Trust, and Vicky Beavers, Chief Executive of the Sleep Charity. Welcome both of you. And first things first, who got a good night's sleep?
Me.
Oh, I can't comment. Fifth Amendment.
Just me then, because I have 3 children. I'm still very much in that phase with the youngest where I am not getting enough sleep. So the idea that people are turning to melatonin does not surprise me in the slightest, to be honest. Let's get into the stats, or what we understand about the numbers of people doing this in a minute. But shall we just do a really simple explanation of what melatonin is first, Paul?
Sure, yeah. So melatonin is a hormone and it's produced by a tiny gland in a brain called the pineal gland. So this is a really active, powerful chemical. And I mention that because it's not a vitamin, even though people...
Vitamin M, right?
Vitamin M is what one of my colleagues in America called it. And it's released by the pineal gland and it sends this really powerful message to our body just to open the gates for sleep. So usually as light levels fall, about 8 o'clock in the evening, we start to produce melatonin. The levels in our own body rise to about midnight, just helping us fall asleep. It doesn't knock us out, but it just reminds the body. It's part of the circadian rhythm that reminds us of now it's night and then it's morning.
And Vicky, it does have a devastating effect on you as parents if your children are not getting enough sleep.
It's the scaffolding that sort of underpins everything, holds everything together. And if we're not sleeping, as parents, we just don't have the ability to be able to parent. But also our children, they fall apart. They can't concentrate at school. Their mental health's affected. And that's why I set the Sleep Charity up, because I'd experienced it as a parent. And I didn't know about melatonin. Had I known, I would have probably been that parent who was begging for melatonin because I didn't know what else to do and there was no other support available.
Just walk me through, how was your experience?
I had my first son in the year 2000, so he's 24 now, and he was the child that basically just never slept. And I did ask for support, so I went to the health visitor, I went to the GP, and I was prescribed antidepressants. And looking back, I probably was depressed, but it was the sleep issues that were causing that. So there was no actual help for the sleep problems. And he was 6 years old before I got a decent night's sleep.
Do we actually have an understanding of how common it is that parents are slipping their kids a melatonin gummy bear before bed?
The short answer is we just know it's very common, but no one really knows how common it is. But we know that the amount of melatonin that's being prescribed for the conditions where it's licensed, so that's children with autism and ADHD, that's gone up dramatically.
Why are we talking about ADHD and autism? What's different about melatonin in those cases?
When we've measured it in children with autism, children with ADHD, there are 2 possible things that can happen. Firstly, some children seem to produce melatonin, but produce it too late. So their melatonin, what we call the dim light onset period, when melatonin levels start to rise, only happens about midnight. And if you're trying to go to bed at 8 p.m.,
you're just not ready.
It's just impossible. And for other children, particularly with autistic spectrum problems, when we measure melatonin by gathering the wee that they're produced in the morning, the overall levels are lower than in the general population. So there seems to be something wrong with the balance or the consistency of melatonin production. And for those children, it really helps getting the body clock back on track and opening their gates for sleep.
Well, I suppose the question is, Paul, why shouldn't you turn to melatonin if your child's struggling to sleep?
Well, I think the first thing to say is There have been plenty of research studies, so we know that melatonin, for the right population of children with autism and ADHD who fail to respond to a behavioural, the melatonin is the safest sleep medicine we've got, and it's superbly effective, and it makes a difference to their sleep, and for some families it can be life-saving. So it definitely has a place, but we've got to bear in mind that you're always balancing the potential harm of any medicine against the benefits. So for a child who's not sleeping at all with severe autism, the benefits outweigh the risks. But once you start moving into a realm of children who are typically developing, who have got no neurological problems, and whose sleep could probably be improved with more consistency and more support, then the risks start to outweigh the benefits, and we need to be really careful.
How much data do we have on the long-term effects of taking melatonin?
So the only data we've got is for children with autism, and that's about 3 years worth of data, and it seems to be safe. And one of the areas of concern was, would it affect puberty and growth for children, and it didn't in that study. But, we thought that aspirin was safe. For many years, we used to give it to children until a very rare disease was discovered. Sometimes you need to give medicines for many, many years to many thousands of children before you find the rare thing. So I think it's still every person prescribing a medicine should be asking, does this medicine, do the benefits outweigh any possible harm?
Paul, do we know what the balance is between who is getting melatonin for their children? Is it just neurodivergent children and their parents that are getting melatonin, or is it a much broader thing?
So prescribed melatonin in this country is almost invariably children who've got some neurological problem like autism, ADHD, or some learning difficulties. As far as typically developing children, so my child's fine, but it's a sleep problem, it's starting to creep through. I suspect in this country, the majority are families whose children will eventually get a diagnosis of an autistic spectrum disorder or ADHD, but there are definitely some typically developing families, that are reading and talking to other families and supporting each other and deciding this is the best and fastest route forwards.
And you talk to sleep specialists all over the world. What kind of pattern do we see in other countries where melatonin is a lot more available?
So in most countries, it's licensed as a medication, needs to be prescribed. So it's really the States that's an outlier. In America, it's in the supermarkets. It just escaped the FDA, whereas here it's licensed as a drug. And they are tearing their hair out. And you asked earlier about age of children. There are children as young as 3 months whose parents maybe don't realise that it's kind of fine for a baby to be up and feeding on demand and are wanting to give melatonin at that stage. And that's really frightening.
And Vicky, how much have you noticed people asking questions around melatonin?
So the families that we support tend to have a belief that melatonin is the go-to. It's going to cure all the sleep difficulties that they've got. Quite often they don't understand what melatonin is. So we've had families who think it's some kind of herbal supplement. I've heard it described as.
Paul literally winced.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of misinformation out there, and I do think it's increased. And we've seen things now like the melatonin gummies, which parents are starting to buy.
Little sweets type things.
Yeah, that's how they appear. And because of the form of the gummies, they're not really aware that this could be in any way dangerous.
It doesn't vibe medicine, does it? If it arrives in in something that might as well be like a chewy sweet.
Yeah. And when we explain to them about that, they're quite horrified. They're wanting to do the very best for the child, and then they've bought something that actually could be harmful. And again, it goes back to that educating people about this. We've had cases where families have been referred to social care because they have given the child these things, and then
because someone's found out that they've given basically a medicine off the internet to a child. That's like a safeguarding
issue. Yeah. And then what we get is families who aren't willing to be honest, and we don't know how many families are doing this, and this is why it's so important to get the message out there right now.
But is your instinct that more families are doing it than should be?
Absolutely, yes.
Let me just quickly talk about the doses. So part of the concern is there have been 3 independent studies that have looked at the actual quality and purity of melatonin in the over-the-counter varieties that you can buy. And it's actually shocking. So if I gave you a packet of melatonin gummies now, you could take one out of the same packet and it might have no melatonin in. You could take another one out and it might have 4 times the amount of melatonin it says on the packets. And of course then, if you're the parent, you might decide, having given the one that's got none in, that your child doesn't